I want to tell you about the day my stepdaughter's wedding showed me exactly what I'd been to this family for 22 years. It started with a seating chart I wasn't supposed to see, and ended with a silence in an empty house that sounded like the truth finally saying itself out loud. But before I get into it, tell me in the comments where you're watching from today. I read every single one. It was a Saturday in late September, the kind of morning you only get in Ontario maybe 4 times a year, the sky that deep blue with no clouds, the maples already turning along the road. I was standing in front of the bathroom mirror trying to get the collar of my dress shirt to sit flat. Navy with a thin white stripe. My stepdaughter Blythe had picked it out with me 3 weeks earlier at a men's shop on King Street. She'd held it up and said, "You'll look so good, Dad." I believed her because I wanted to. My hands weren't shaking from nerves. They were shaking from something closer to pride. 22 years of drop-offs and pickups and science fair projects and midnight drives to emergency when she had appendicitis at 15. 22 years of being the one who was there. And today, she was getting married. Today was supposed to be the payoff for all of it. I heard my wife Carolyn through the bedroom wall. She was on the phone talking low and fast, the way she does when the conversation isn't meant for me. I turned off the tap. The pipes knocked and went quiet. I caught the end of it. "Just keep him near the front. He deserves that," she paused. "I'll explain later. She'll understand." I dried my hands on the towel hanging by the sink. I looked at myself in the mirror for a long moment. The face looking back was a man who had just heard something he'd been half expecting for years, but had never let himself believe. I walked into the bedroom and sat on the edge of the bed. Carolyn came in a minute later with her phone tucked into the pocket of her robe. She smiled, warm and easy, the same smile that had made me say yes to all of it 22 years ago at a church potluck in Burlington, Ontario. A widow with a 7-year-old girl and a laugh that filled a room. "Ready?" she asked. I told her I was. I didn't mention what I'd heard. I wanted to see how far she'd carry it. Let me go back. I met Carolyn Ashby in the spring of 2002 at St. Andrew's Presbyterian on Brant Street. She had a daughter named Blythe with big eyes and a gap between her front teeth, who stood behind her mother's leg and watched me like I was a math problem she hadn't decided whether to bother solving. Blythe's biological father was a man named Reed, who I heard about the way you hear about weather on the radio, usually after it's already passed through. He'd been inconsistent from the start, and by the time I met Carolyn, he had been inconsistent for years. She never spoke badly of him in front of Blythe, and I respected that. But she made it clear, it's just the two of us now. We're starting over. So I helped them start over. I moved them out of the apartment on Elgin Street and into the house I owned on Lakeview Crescent in Oakville. A 3-bedroom semi-detached, with a backyard big enough for a trampoline and a garden Carolyn eventually turned into something beautiful. That house was mine. I'd bought it 4 years before I ever met her, with money I'd saved working 20 years in commercial real estate. My name on the deed, my name on the mortgage, my savings in the foundation. I added Carolyn's name to nothing. Not because I didn't love her. My father told me once, before he passed, that love doesn't need a signature to prove itself. "Keep your name on what you built," he said. I took his word for it. Carolyn never brought it up. I told myself that meant she understood. Blythe got braces at 12. I drove her to the orthodontist on Trafalgar Road every 6 weeks for 2 years. I sat in the waiting room reading year-old copies of Maclean's and never complained once. When she made the rep volleyball team at 14, I rearranged my schedule to drive her to tournaments across the GTA every other weekend. When she got into McMaster for nursing, I wrote the check for the first year's tuition before she'd even finished celebrating. Carolyn hugged me that night and said, "This is what a real father does." Real. She used that word a lot. I should have paid more attention to it. Reed showed up maybe twice a year. Christmas if the roads were clear. Blythe's birthday if it didn't conflict with something else. He'd pull into the driveway in whatever truck he was driving that season, always something newer than Mason's, lean against the door and grin like he'd built the whole province with his own hands. He'd take Blythe for lunch at a Kelsey's, bring her back with something from the mall, a necklace, a pair of boots. Then he'd disappear until summer. He never paid child support. I know because I once asked Carolyn about it, careful and quiet, and she waved it off. "That's between me and him," she said. "You're the one who's here. I was the one who was here. For 22 years, I was the one who was here." The drive to the venue was quiet. Carolyn sat in the passenger seat with her phone tilted slightly away from me. The ceremony was being held at Hazel Hall, a restored Victorian property in Niagara-on-the-Lake that Blythe and her fiancé Callum had been planning for 18 months. I'd put $62,000 toward it. Catering, flowers, the photographer, the open bar, the rehearsal dinner the night before. The venue itself. Every time Blythe had said she felt bad about the cost, I'd told her the same thing. "You only do this once. Let me do this." Carolyn put her phone down somewhere around the QEW and looked out the window at the vineyard rows going past. "She's going to be so happy today," she said. I said I knew that. I meant it. We parked in the gravel lot behind the hall. Carolyn walked ahead toward the bridal suite to check on Blythe. I carried the card with the gift, a check, and the pair of pearl earrings that had belonged to my mother, which I'd asked Blythe 3 weeks ago if she'd want to wear for something old. She'd said yes without hesitating, and I'd driven to my safety deposit box at the TD branch on Spears Road and taken them out myself. Inside the main hall, the chairs were already filled. Friends, family, Callum's people from New Brunswick, Carolyn's sisters and their husbands. I found the seating chart near the entrance. Blythe had a bridal party table at the front, then a family table behind it. I looked for my name. I found it at table 7, the middle of the room. Not close, not far, just placed somewhere that wasn't anywhere in particular. I looked at the family table, Carolyn's name, her sisters, Blythe's grandmother on Carolyn's side, and Reed Ashford. Reed's name was at the family table, in the seat that I had imagined for 18 months would be mine. I stood at that chart for a moment, long enough that the woman arranging programs on the end table glanced over at me. I found my seat at table 7. I set my jacket on the chair. I placed the card with the earrings in my breast pocket. I watched Reed come in 20 minutes later. He was wearing a new suit, charcoal gray, pocket square and everything. He walked to the family table like he'd built the chairs himself, shook a few hands, laughed at something someone said. Carolyn leaned over to him and said something I couldn't hear from where I sat. He nodded. He looked comfortable, like a man coming home to a room that had always been keeping his seat warm. When they called everyone to stand for the bride, Blythe appeared at the back of the hall in a dress I had helped pay for without being asked for my opinion on. She looked beautiful, genuinely, completely beautiful. She walked down the aisle with one hand on Carolyn's arm and one hand empty, where I had once quietly imagined she might want mine. Reed stood at the family table and took a photo on his phone. I stood at table 7 and clapped with everyone else. After the ceremony, I made my way through the crowd toward the garden where the cocktail hour was set up. I found Blythe near the fountain. She was laughing at something Callum had said. When she saw me, she smiled, the smile that starts somewhere in her eyes before it reaches her mouth. She hugged me. Tight, real. Thank you for everything, she said, for all of it. Honestly. I handed her the card with the earrings. She opened it and her eyes went wet when she saw what was inside. These were your mom's? My mother's, I said. I thought you should have them. She put them on right there, looking in the little mirror in her evening bag. She touched one with her fingertip. Then someone called her name across the garden and she turned. And Reed was standing there in his charcoal suit with his arms out wide. And Blythe walked toward him. And he pulled her into a hug and held on like 20 years of absence had just been a misunderstanding, and a photographer materialized from somewhere and crouched and got the shot. I watched them. I thought about the appendicitis, about the orthodontist waiting room, about the McMaster tuition and the Nissan Sentra I'd bought her at 20 when her old Civic finally gave out on the 401, about a Tuesday night in November 12 years ago when she was 9, and she had a nightmare and called out and I was the one who got up. I thought about all of it, standing 20 feet away holding a glass of sparkling water while someone else got the photograph. Callum's father found me 20 minutes later near the bar. Good man, quiet. He was from Moncton and talked about the drive up. We had a decent conversation about nothing. It helped. I drove home alone. Carolyn texted me from the reception that she was staying for the first dance and the cake. Then a second text. Blythe wants a small family dinner tomorrow, just close family. We'll figure out timing. Love you. I read that message twice in the driveway. Close family, a category I had apparently been filed out of. I sat in the car until the motion light on the garage clicked off. Then I went inside. The house was quiet. I sat at the kitchen table, the one near the window that looks out to the backyard, the one Carolyn and I had picked out together at the IKEA on North Service Road when we moved in the second time after we renovated. My chair, the one I always took. I didn't break anything. I didn't call anyone. I sat there and let the feeling settle into something solid and still. Something that wasn't anger yet, something older and heavier than anger. I didn't sleep. I lay in bed watching the ceiling fan turn, not fast enough to do anything useful, just moving the same air in circles. When the light through the blinds turned gray, I got up, made coffee, stewed at the counter because sitting at the table felt like something I wasn't ready to do yet. By 9 in the morning, I had made 4 decisions. By 10, I had started on the first one. I called my financial advisor, a woman named Petra. No, not her. A man named Gordon, who I'd been with for 15 years, TD Wealth on Kerr Street in Oakville. I told him I wanted to review every automatic transfer tied to Blythe's accounts, the monthly contribution I'd been making to her TFSA since she was 23, the amount I sent toward her and Callum's down payment account that we'd set up together 6 months earlier at First National, the one I'd agreed to match dollar for dollar up to $40,000. Gordon said, "Do you want to pause or cancel?" "Cancel," I said. "Today." I called the solicitor I'd used when I bought the house, a woman named Adeze out of a firm on Church Street. I asked her about a postnuptial agreement and about what my options were if I decided to revise my will. She told me to come in Monday. I said I'd be there. The third call was to a real estate agent named Barry, who I'd met years ago at a Rotary luncheon. He picked up on the second ring. I told him I was thinking about listing the house on Lakeview Crescent. He asked if I was sure. I said I was past sure. He came by Tuesday, walked through every room with his clipboard, checked the furnace, tapped the walls, tested the windows. He stopped in the kitchen and looked at the backyard where Carolyn's garden was still in late bloom. "Does your wife know?" he asked carefully. "She's celebrating," I said. "I'll handle it." He listed it Thursday. The offer came in 11 days. A young couple from Mississauga, both teachers, one infant and another on the way. Pre-approved, no conditions, wanted to close by mid-December. Barry called with the number and I said yes before he finished reading it. I signed the papers on a Wednesday at a notary's office in Burlington. Fluorescent lights and the smell of old carpet. My hand was steady except once, near the bottom of the last page. Then it was done. I packed over 4 nights, only what mattered. My tools, the box of my father's things I kept in the closet, my records and my books. The photo of my mother on the mantel. I left everything Carolyn had brought into that house exactly as she'd arranged it. Every cushion, every framed photo, every small thing she'd chosen for a life I was apparently furniture in. I rented a place in Port Dalhousie, a 1-bedroom on a quiet street 2 blocks from Lake Ontario, a small deck. A landlord who didn't ask many questions. It was spare and it was mine. Carolyn found out on a Sunday afternoon. I know because Barry texted me that she'd shown up at the house and the new owners had answered the door. He said it was loud. I was sitting on the deck eating a bowl of soup I'd made from scratch. I put my phone face down and finished eating. She called 9 times. I answered on the 10th. Her voice came through the line pulled tight with shock. "What did you do? Where is our house?" "It was my house," I said. "You just lived in it." She started talking about lawyers, about 22 years, about everything she'd given up, about how I had no right. I let her go for a while. Then I said, "You taught Blythe that the man who shows up is the man who waits at the back. That's the only thing in 22 years I actually needed you to get right." She hung up. Blythe called an hour later. Her voice was different from her mother's, quieter, like she was carrying something breakable and knew it. "Why?" she said. Just that word. "Ask your mother," I said. "Ask her why Reed's name was at the family table and mine was at table 7. Ask her who wrote the check for the venue. Then ask yourself who you called in the middle of the night when you were 15 and the pain in your side wouldn't stop." There was a long pause. I could hear Carolyn somewhere in the background, sharp and insistent. "I didn't think you'd actually," Blythe started. "That's the problem," I said. "Nobody thought I would." She hung up. I didn't contest anything. There was nothing to contest. The house was mine. The financial contributions I'd made over 22 years were gifts with no legal claim attached. My solicitor confirmed what I already knew. Carolyn could talk to whatever lawyer she wanted. The deed said what it said, and the deed had said it for 26 years. They sent a letter anyway, through a young lawyer from Hamilton who spelled my name wrong on the first page. I sent back the deed, the mortgage records, the full history of every payment I'd made toward Blythe's education, her vehicles, her apartment in Hamilton during school, her TFSA contributions, the wedding itself. I didn't hear back after that. Winter came early that year on the lake. The water went flat and gray, and the wind off Ontario rattled the windows of my little rental in a way that wasn't unpleasant once I got used to it. I bought a good space heater and learned how to bake bread, something I'd always meant to do and never had reason to start. There was a diner on Lakeshore called Ellen's that I started going to Thursday mornings. Good coffee, no pretense, the kind of place where the same people sit at the same stools and nobody asks what you do for work. I got to know a man named Hugh who was 81, a retired CN rail conductor from St. Catharines. He drank black coffee and read the Standard and said very little, but when he did talk, it counted. One morning in November, he looked at me sideways over his cup and said, "You've got that look." "What look?" I said. "Like a man who just set something down he's been carrying up a long hill. Doesn't know what to do with the downhill yet," I laughed. "First real one in a while." "You get used to it," he said. "The weight leaves, but the posture takes some time." Blythe texted me in December. One line. "Can we talk?" I sat with that for a long time. I thought about the gap-toothed 7-year-old behind her mother's leg, about the kitchen table homework and the volleyball tournaments, and the appendicitis and the essays she'd written for McMaster while I made tea and told her, "Just write it like you're talking to me." "When you're ready to really talk," I wrote back. Not before. We met in January at a coffee shop on St. Paul Street in St. Catharines. Neutral ground. She looked older than she had at the wedding. Or maybe just more honest. She told me Reed had sent a card for Christmas and hadn't responded to any of her messages since. He came to the wedding because Mom asked him, she said. She said he deserved to be at the family table. She said it was important for her own closure. She never asked me what I thought. I didn't say I'd known something like that was coming. I didn't need to. "I'm sorry," she said. "Not about the house." I mean about the house too, but mostly about the table, about the seating chart. I saw it the morning of, and I didn't say anything, and I should have. That one landed somewhere deep, in the place where the old herd had taken up residence. Sorry doesn't undo it, I said, but it's a start. We finished our coffee. She hugged me on the sidewalk, the kind of hug that's still figuring out what it is. Two people learning to stand in the same space again, without pretending the distance wasn't real. It wasn't a clean ending. It was an honest one. After 22 years, I could live with that. These days I wake up early and take my coffee out to the deck and watch the lake come out of the dark. The water in winter has a color that's hard to name, somewhere between pewter and green. Hugh was right. The posture does take some time, but it comes. I started woodworking again, something I hadn't done since before I met Carolyn. I set up a small bench in the storage room the landlord said I could use. Nothing fancy. Small frames, a few shelves, a jewelry box I made for no particular reason, and ended up giving to the woman who runs the flower shop next to Ellen's because she'd admired a piece I was carrying to my car. Some nights I still think about the seating chart, about my name at table 7, about how nobody put me there with malice, or maybe they did, but either way I'd been practicing for that seat for years, taking up a little less space each time, pushing my chair in a little more quietly, making myself convenient and then invisible, as if shrinking was the price of being allowed to stay. I don't do that anymore. What it took me 22 years and one seating chart to understand is this. You can love a family completely and still be treated as a placeholder. You can pay every bill and be called upon in every emergency, and still find that when the moment comes for someone to stand at the front of the room has already decided you're the kind of person who belongs toward the middle. Near the back, somewhere that keeps you useful without making you visible. That is not love. That is furniture. If you've ever been the one who drove to the hospital at midnight while someone else got the credit. If you've ever shown up for 2 decades only to find your seat has been given to the man who barely showed up at all. I hope this finds you where you need to hear it. You don't have to make a scene to take your dignity back. You don't have to explain yourself or justify or prove a thing. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply stop holding up something that was never built to hold you and walk out into whatever comes next. That's enough. That's more than enough. Thank you for being here. Share your thoughts in the comments. I read everyone. And if this found someone who needed it today, pass it along. I'm Harold, and this is Voices of Uncle Harold.